Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Today we're going to be taking a look at a United Nations agency, the International Labor Organization, that is involved in a wide range of issues that cover everything from A to Z, so to speak. My guest is an expert on the ILO. Mr. Kevin Cassidy is the director and representative to the Bretton Woods Multilateral Organizations and Canada of the International Labor Organization Office for the United States in Washington, D.C. Kevin Cassidy, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill. Great to see you.
Great to see you again, Kevin. Always, when we do this interview, we always give a little overview of the ILO. Let's just do that again. And if you could, just what is the purpose of the ILO? When was it formed? Why was it formed?
So the ILO came about as a child of war at the end of World War I. There was a lot of thinking about the impact of the Industrial Revolution. It was thinking about the Bolshevik Revolution, about the demand for rights, for social justice, for good wages, for living wages. So the ILO came about at a time when the League of Nations was founded. The ILO and the League of Nations were created in the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 to put a little bit of structure and order, at least for the ILO, in terms of the world of work.
And just a couple of years ago, you had your 100th anniversary. Congratulations.
Thanks, Bill. It was an amazing time where we were able to commemorate the close relationship that the United States and Canada have with the UN. Some may know that the US was not actually an original member of the ILO, but did host our first conference down in the Pan American Union building today, which is called the OAS headquarters. Canada has also a special place in the ILO's heart. Because during the war in 1939, 1940, there was a decision made to move the ILO out of Geneva, and McGill University in Montreal had been the home of the ILO for several years. And the US, of course, had supported the ILO with hosting its first conference in the interwar years called the Declaration of Philadelphia had come out of that conference. And that really animated our main issues, such as labor is not a commodity, and that poverty anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. So really at the core of our foundings, the US and Canada were a part of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, our viewers can go to your website at www.ilo.org for further information. Kevin, also you have 4 pillars that basically hold up the ILO. What are they and how are they being reinterpreted today to move into a different concept, different mode of thinking and evaluation and interpretation of equality, education, decent work, and those types of concepts?
Yes. These issues sort of build upon one another. So overall, the ILO is dedicated to decent work. Now, decent work is a concept. It's not just about a good job or a quality job. It has 4 components to it. And those 4 components are quality education. How do we prepare people for the job market? How do we understand the labor market dynamics? Where are the sectors that are growing? How do we provide protection for people in that? So that requires focus on quality employment generation. The second element of that, we look at standards and norms, the rules of the road as they were. The ILO had put together through its conventions that are negotiated by member states, by governments, not by the ILO. We are the experts, but it is the member states that decide what will be the conventions. And once they ratify those conventions, they become a part of international law. And also there's an obligation on the country that signed that convention, that ratified the convention, to put that into law. So standards and norms are very, very important. And I mentioned the Declaration of Philadelphia, but there's also the Declaration on Fundamental Principles, Rights and Works, Principles and Rights at Work, which are about no child labor, no forced labor, no discrimination, and of course, freedom of association, collective bargaining. The third element of that is social dialogue. And social dialogue is really about communication between the workers and employers, the actors of the real economy, as it were, discussing how does the company grow? What are the terms and conditions in which we hire people? How do we remunerate people? How do we discuss those problems? So communication is absolutely essential to growing and thriving businesses. And then finally, we have social protection. And social protection is a lifelong social safety net. So everything from access to early education, to healthcare, to transitions within the labor market, upskilling and reskilling, and of course, pensions when we retire. And Bill, just to close, that all of this jurisprudence, all of this knowledge base is then problematized with the lens of the future of work. And during the centenary, we had a very important discussion with a number of heads of state. There were 27 eminent personalities that made up the Future of Work Commission. And they came up with ideas about how do we prepare for the future of work given the mega drivers of change. This is climate change, this is demographics, this is migration, this is a number of other issues such as digital technology. How do platform workers have protection in the world of work today? So it really is building upon the knowledge that we have developed and really looking forward for a human-centered development.
Well, the world of work is changing. We see that the workforce of today is not the workforce of 10 or 15 years ago, and certainly won't be 10 or 15 years from now. Your office was involved in a really interesting, I guess, a case study or experiment, if you want to call it that. You went around the United States and did 185 interviews with workers who were involved in a wide range of work situations. And of course, you went around the US, but you could have gone to Canada, Mexico, it could have been India, wherever, and probably come up with very similar stories. And let's take a look at some of those case studies and get a little background. I mentioned work is changing. We see that robotics is going to play an extremely important role. It is now, and it will in the future. We'll just start off with your first case study of a robotic laboratory, and then move to the aeronautic training. What's the story behind the robotic laboratory?
Yeah, we were invited to go see Dr. Jihad Karuk, who is a surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, one of the top level institutions in the United States. And the doctor, who is a surgeon, was saying that with the technologies we have today, that we have to keep up. And it's not only just about operating on somebody in a theater as we have, since the 19th century, where people would peer in at the operating table. But now technology comes into play. So they showed us this wonderful development, which is called the Da Vinci machine. And it's almost like a video game with pedals and hand levers and buttons. And this helps the surgeon articulate the robotic arm that goes into a single incision, so thereby reducing any infections that may come about, creates a gas bubble around the area of operation, thereby creating a sterile environment as well. Then the robotic arm can work within that operating environment, do the necessary procedures, and then the gas is withdrawn, the robotic arm comes out. So you have minimal invasive surgery with experts operating this new technology. And that doctor could be in the same building, in the same country, but it could be around the world. Dr. Karuk could do this from Cleveland for somebody in Bangkok, or somebody in Beijing, or somebody in Delhi. So the technology today is really advancing, but you do need the basis of surgery, medicine. So that's why we look at the skilling and upskilling in the future of work.
Very, yes,
Yeah,
please. Go right
Bill,
ahead.
you mentioned about another one, and sorry to jump in
Mhm.
there. I'm so
No,
excited.
please.
I mean, the dignity at work photo assignment has really connected me. I grew up in a small town, New York City, and with that, I had a chance now to move out across the U.S. and to meet people. And in Colorado, we went to the Metropolitan University, and we met the students who are studying to be pilots. And some of them may even go on to the space program. And they have this very sophisticated virtual reality and laboratory where the students can actually get behind virtually a 747 or other types of airplanes and be able to learn how to use that. So what is the benefit of doing that? Well, you don't have to put 500 passengers at risk who are in the plane. You don't have to put millions and millions of dollars worth of equipment at risk. You don't have to put untrained and unqualified students into the air right away. They could work in this virtual reality. And it's an amazing opportunity for the students to understand the technology, but also, as the Professor Jeffrey Forrest was saying there, is that it's so important for them to have that humanity side as well, because there are certain things that humans do that machines, at least now, cannot do. All the technology is great, but you have to have situational awareness and realize that you have people behind you who are counting on you to do a good job.
And we can see that the aeronautics industry is changing quite dramatically, especially as they look towards developing green energy. They're looking forward to moving into a cleaner environment and cutting down that carbon footprint. Well, we'll move on. LeBron James is probably one of the best known ball players, certainly in the United States and many areas of the world. You went to a school that he started, is that correct, in Akron, Ohio?
We did, Bill. We were invited into, and again, my staff back in the office were great in sort of identifying some of these really important stories and professions. And we went to the Lebron James I Promise School in Akron, Ohio. And it was an amazing experience where Stephanie Arnett, who is a teacher for I believe that they're the third graders, and it was amazing how she had respect from the students in the environment of the classroom, that there are rules that are up there teaching the kids about, respecting others, listening to other people say. And the amazing thing is that the I Promise School actually takes in the children that are basically left behind by the public school or the private school system. So these are children who are not performing very well, but the amount of respect that they had for their teacher, because the teacher is treating them like an adult, giving them the sort of training that they need in order to be able to thrive in society. And they take a whole of community approach. So it's not just about training the child and putting them back into their environment, but it's also working with the parents, giving them job training skills, providing them with a food pantry, clothing. Maybe there is some assistance that they could avail themselves of. So it does look at the whole family, because when a young child has skills and unrealized potential, you need to provide for the family as well, so that they all grow together. And it's an amazing setup. And I really encourage people to look into that methodology. I think it's really a successful one for building resilient communities.
You're talking about developing skills. That leads right into the next topic, and where social skills were developed at Camp Abnaki on Lake Champlain.
Yeah, John Kuipers, who is the director of Camp Abnaki up in North Hero, Vermont, which is on Grand Isle. And it sits very close to the Canadian border, and it's just across Lake Champlain, which is an amazing body of water that separates Vermont from New York itself. And Camp Abnaki, and I have a soft spot in my heart because I went to camp up there as well too, on Lake Champlain many, many years ago, but a different camp. And what he was talking about was so important. He said, I want, kids who are either, privileged, or kids who aren't privileged, to have access to being away at camp, looking at nature, respecting nature, working with other children, understanding, again, respect for another, listening to others, teamwork, problem solving. I mean, these are all important cognitive skills that employers are looking for today. And if you don't have that head start, if you don't have that chance and opportunity to develop that, to have somebody to guide you, someone who can actually slow you down and talk to you on a level that you understand, that you don't feel threatened, John is doing an amazing job in helping these children become good adults as they grow up. And of course, John was very keen to tell me about how the second generation, and now even once a third generation of campers, because their grandfather had gone there, are now coming to the camp and having the same wonderful outdoors experience that they had when they were younger themselves.
That's a very important experience. Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous shows. Also, if you're involved with a PBS or community access television station, or perhaps an educational institution that has an intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a computer, you have a website, you like our shows and you want to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided at no cost as a public service to help us better understand international issues. Today, we're taking a look at a very interesting project by the Washington office of the United Nations International Labor Organization. And my guest today is Mr. Kevin Cassidy. Mr. Kevin Cassidy is director and representative to the Bretton Woods Multilateral Organizations and Canada of the ILO office for the United States. Kevin, we're going to shift gears here now. We've got still have 4 wonderful projects to talk about. We're going to move to equality and non-discrimination at work. What were those 4 projects and how did they tie into that overall theme?
Right. So what we look at in the world of work, not only just is, creating jobs, creating quality jobs and upskilling and so, but we have to ensure that these are inclusive and equitable workplaces as well, too. So, for example, we did not just want to go to high-tech workers or to people who are stocking the shelves. I mean, all of these are very important jobs, and unfortunately, jobs that have very high social value, like a teacher or a caregiver, have a very poor and low remuneration rate. So when we were looking at this, we also had to ensure that we took into account persons with disabilities. So we had some amazing people that we had met along the way, and I'm really happy to tell you their stories.
Please do. Let's start with the lady who became a boat captain or a boat driver, shall we say?
Right, Captain Cindy Alsop. She actually works on the Lake Champlain ferries. So after we were at the camp, we decided we wanted to get over to Plattsburgh, New York. And Captain Cindy manages the ferry as a part of the Lake Champlain ferry system that goes from Grand Isle over across to Plattsburgh, New York. Now, this is a bit of a lifeline for people who want to live either in Vermont and work in New York, or live in New York and then go to Vermont, or go to their vacation homes. And so, and this ferry runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and every 15 minutes it takes cars. I think the capacity is probably about 60 cars back and forth across the lake there. Now, this saves hours of traveling in traffic and will reduce, obviously, the carbon footprint of those cars. But it's a wonderful way to do that. Now, Captain Cindy was in the Merchant Marine, developed her skill sets there, and now she is the captain of her own boat. I must admit, I haven't seen many captains of ferry boats, so it showed that it was about the skill sets, it was about the personality, it was about her ability to work in this environment that provided her with the opportunity, and she was able to take advantage of that. So seeing a woman as a captain, which is very good for role models as well too. We want young women to realize that there is no glass ceiling, that you can achieve what you want. So Captain Cindy is a wonderful example of that.
Speaking of role models for young women, what is the Global Minded project that you involved in?
Bill, thanks very much. You know, I was introduced to Carol Carter, a CEO and founder of Global Minded. Carol spent many years in the private sector, and I think towards the after many years, she decided I wanted to change it up a bit. She wanted to actually help first generation American students, particularly women and women of color, to be able to realize their dreams. Sometimes it's really just a matter of access or the networks that you have. And so Carol Carter and a number of her supporters have been providing opportunities for young first generation American, mostly women, and providing them with mentorship, both in studies as well as in how to prepare themselves for the future, how to think about a career for themselves, how to understand where their skills lied, where their gifts were, and provides them with that opportunity to project beyond the narrow confines of the postcode from which they were born into. And Global Minded is helping these young women not only excel within school, but also find internships to be able to work with very senior people who would be able to help them and guide them along their path. And they are really doing an amazing job in finding not only the right fit for these young women and men, but also that they excel in the companies that they're working with. So, you know, Global Minded is one of those groups that really we need in order to make this a very inclusive and equitable workplace for young women, and particularly women of color in today's job market.
Mm-hmm. Sadly, there are hundreds of millions of people around the world, in the United States and around the world, who have some developmental disability. They may be blind, they may be hearing impaired, whatever the case might be, but they still have tremendous resources. You ran into a situation like that at the Blind Institute of Technology. Tell me the story about that.
Yeah, you know, I was introduced to Mike Hess, and Mike is the president of the Blind Institute of Technology. And Mike he's an amazing guy. He has such wonderful energy. I mean, really excited about life and opportunities. Mike has been blind since birth, but he was, as he calls himself, a desk jockey in the financial services. And he was using the technology, you know, that could read the texts for him, you know, obviously Braille, and obviously the other elements within our technological world that assist people or persons with disabilities to be able to interact, to have that opportunity. And Mike proposed to me what I thought was a brilliant idea called the $1 billion Initiative. And the $1 billion Initiative was all about the fact of saying, if you took 1,000 people who may be blind or deaf since birth, but obviously can still learn and still can develop skills and talents themselves, and you provide them with an opportunity for a good job. And this is what Mike says. His job is to kick down the doors of those businesses and give a chance to people with disabilities. And Mike said that if you had somebody who was formally maybe receiving housing vouchers or food stamps or other type of assistance that they would need because they weren't gainfully employed. And over the lifetime of per person, that's about $1 million. So if you were able to put 1,000 persons with disabilities into good paying jobs based on their skill sets, then you are creating $1 billion of prosperity back into the system, plus all the taxes and the contributions they make to the economy by earning an income and using that. So it's a really, really smart idea to look at people for their skills and their abilities rather than do they look like me? Are they do they go to the same school as I do? Do they have no disabilities? Because sometimes, well, I think a lot of times persons with disability face a lot of challenges and barriers in the workplace today.
Now, how did the owner of the Meadowcroft Farms tie into your case study?
We met with Nan Kennedy. Nan is the CEO and the farm manager for Meadowcroft Farms up in Washington, Maine. A small farm of several dozen acres, but it was farmland that her great grandfather had for many, many years back. And Nan went to Bowdoin College, which I think most people know is one of what they call the new Ivies. And Anne worked, very hard on business, and of course her other passion, which is on literature as well too. And she decided that she wanted to take up the family farm because she grew up there. She loved the meadows. She loved walking through the forest, and she really felt connected, stewardship to the land. So she went on for her master's degree in agriculture. And she now runs a farm which raises sheep. She works with a geneticist in New Zealand to have sheep with very high quality, almost alpaca-like wool. And she raises these sheep. You have to be up every day. Anyone who works on a farm knows the tough job that is. So Anne is out there working with the sheep. Then she will shear the wool. She will comb the wool. She will dye the wool with a process that she developed, which is environmentally friendly dyes with a solar powered system that she developed and designed on her own and runs and manages on her own, and then hires women in the surrounding area to knit sweaters and blankets and shawls, and this creates a micro enterprise in a very small area in Maine. So she's doing this amazing job, all on her own. I mean, of course, when COVID had hit, that put things into a tailspin because on the farm, you have to be in close contact, and so it did create challenges, but it's still a going concern. And if anyone wants to go to it, seacolors.com. Wonderful, beautiful products coming out of Meadowcroft, very high quality, and it supports the local community in Maine.
Kevin, we've just touched literally, I mean, literally or figuratively both, the tip of the iceberg. You had, I think, 185 interviews, and we've only touched upon 8 of them, but you featured many of them on your website at www.ilo.org/Washington. So our viewers can go to that website and read more detail about what we just barely mentioned today, given our time limitation. Kevin, in closing, in our last minute or so, the hardest question: what was the most memorable moment of this entire odyssey around the United States to visit with these really interesting, fascinating, and important people?
Everyone had a story to tell, and I was so entranced by that. Some people had talked about following one's gift than following one's passion. There was a woman who was a fashion editor for Vogue magazine, and she realized at one time that she was very empathetic and that she understood other people. And she went to train to become a shamanist and a crystal healer. And she was raised from a Catholic family in Pittsburgh. So amazing story. There was the head of the LA Connects, the opera out in LA. And I asked her, because they were so close, are you a family? She goes, we're not a family. What we are is a community. And a community are people with skills who come together to create something of beauty for the rest of society. I met a man who was working in a trucking company and decided to create his own, the crawler hauler. And he was saying, that when I started my job, I just wanted to be the boss. I wanted to be in charge. And he said, after 3 years, I realized when I became a boss, everybody was my boss, the clients, the suppliers. There were so many demands on his time. But one thing that really struck me was how people identified with their work and how they saw themselves as a part of this. Dr. Joe Nichols out of the University of Texas in Galveston Medical Branch. She's working on pigs' lungs for two purposes. One, to reanimate them and transplant them into lungs, so you know more about transplanting. And pigs' lungs are very similar to humans with an extra ventricle. But also, she is working on the effects of zero gravity on lungs. And she knows, and she said, I will never see this work to its fruition in my lifetime. And my students and their students may not. But one day, I will be one part of a very long chain that will result in amazing discoveries and research. And I was so humbled by her ability to commit her life to something that she would not see the end of in terms of the things that she has started.
Kevin Cassidy, they're really fascinating case studies, and I wish we had more time to hear about all of them because they're really exciting. But Kevin Cassidy with the International Labor Organization office in Washington, D.C., I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Bill, thank you very much.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.